For those of you who don't know, bot copy is a web chat interface for Dialogflow. So if you're using Dialogflow and you're looking to put it on your website, bot copy could be a really good solution for you. But enough about us. We're going to go ahead and talk about some UX things. And I use this.
Don't click yet. Yeah. Well, this is, again, like Dustin said, our fourth time speaking. So it's going back to 2016.
Switch sides with me so I can be closer.
At that time, we, as pioneers, were very interested in copywriting. Does anyone remember Poncho? Show of hands. Poncho, the weather bot.
Poncho's a nice fuzzy cat. We kind of fell in love with it 4 years ago. It really got us into the space.
The point is, there was a lot of copywriting that went into it, a lot of cleverness, and everyone in the room was pretty much, we went around the panel and said, who's your favorite UX? And everyone said Poncho, hands down, even from the big companies. And Poncho's no longer around because the UX wasn't really a good use case. The copywriting was phenomenal off the charts, but the UX didn't really, the use case didn't really matter in the end of the day. You didn't really need a very smart weather bot.
So we would constantly question ourselves, okay, what really makes better UX? And we would play around with other NLP and NLU engines. At the time, and we still do, it's what we integrate with today. We found and fell in love with Dialogflow because of everything we could do with it in context you could add to the conversations. As you can see, here's a pretty image of all the response types you can add. This is Bot Copy's web widget. But enough about really how we've come and where we've come and why we've fell in love with NLP. Let's kind of dive into some copywriting stuff.
Right, on the agenda it says Dustin and I are here to talk about copywriting and UX. The first rule of copywriting is editing, as you already know. Okay, so we're not going to talk about copywriting. You just heard from the greatest copywriter in the industry, Hans. If you want to, if you take copywriting very seriously, go to RoboCopy. But if you walk out of here with one message, is that copy should be clear, concise, and upbeat. We spend a lot of time spinning wheels about personas, brand DNA, and that's all great in theory. What we've seen in practice with thousands of bots really comes down to those three things. And those three things are not so easy to master. You still need a great copywriter who's been honing these skills for years and years just to achieve that. And if you can achieve that, you're 90% of the way there.
What about like cleverness and being cunning and funny and cute, whatever? Isn't that important?
I don't think that cleverness should be on the top of your list with AI. I don't think the user cares if your bot is clever. I think the user wants their problem solved fast. I think it's not so important, as important, what your bot says as what your user says, and whether you understand what your user says and can respond in a smart and useful way. We've come a long way from Poncho, where it was about how can we be like Saturday Night Live, how can we be really clever.
So let's give an example of that.
This is actually a real use case. This is our bot at Bot Copy. And not so clever, but really a good listener. So this is NLU in practice. A user says, what's Bot Copy? What the heck is your product? The bot answers. The user asks a follow-up because the first answer had too much jargon in it. So the user says, in English, what the hell are you talking about? I don't know what that means. So we actually had a fallback or a follow-up that said, sorry that was too complicated. Here it is in an easier way. And then there's a follow-up to the follow-up, and we'll get into that, but it takes a lot of work. There's no way around that. I wish I could say, hey, you can just have this beautiful technology and it runs by itself, but there's a lot of elbow grease involved. And that's how you get to a bot that's personalized, in our experience.
And really, so how do you make the bot personalized?
Well, the way we do it, what worked for us was NLU. You all know this already. We're not saying anything new today. We're just saying it in a different way, hopefully. That's really easy for you to take away, is that a bot that listens is built on a framework that has powerful NLU technology behind it. Machine learning technology that can statistically score where the query should be matched to, which intent.
But the problem with these NLP, NLU things is there's a lot of this new jargon. Like you're looking at intents, entities, fulfillments, contexts, events, training phrases, actions, and parameters. So it's new, but really, how hard is it?
I don't know how many of you know what these terms mean. Some of you, this is old hat, but many of you may not know what actions and parameters are or how to use them. So we want to make sure that you understand that these are the new things that you might want to wrestle with this year or hire people to do so, and that this is not that new. Dialogflow actually is 10 years old. It was API AI invented 10 years ago, and we still aren't seeing Fortune 100s, Fortune 500s digging into these technologies and mastering them. And yet we've already shown that to have a personalized experience, this is what you need to master. Why? Because there's tremendous demand. We're going to explain why there's so much demand.
If you look here, we've done a little bit of a study in just call centers alone. So we'll just highlight Texas here, where you see there's 591 call centers and over 245,000 employees at each one of these call centers. And employees answering very repetitive things. And go ahead to the next slide. In call centers like this, and to be honest, these scripts aren't Shakespeare.
No, they're not Shakespeare. And this doesn't mean that we're not going to need humans. We're not suggesting that. There's always going to be calls that require escalation to humans. But the argument we're making and what we're seeing is that we're eagerly handing off the baton to the human too early. And there's going to be fewer humans needed. Now, we're not up here to be political. We think there's a $200 billion problem. And if you do the math, ask yourself, how much of that $200 billion are you paying into this problem? And how much can you reduce that by this year? Now,
so we've seen in the past 2 years like a lot of dilemma between the difference, what we call dumb bots versus smart bots. And in the Rasa presentation, you might see the dumb bots more of like the click bots or the decision tree heavy bots with 1 and 2, but then he kind of got further into the 3, 4. And here you see on VentureBeat, even this is the past 2 years, why are Microsoft and Amazon ditching their smart bots? And then you see examples like this. Bonjour, how would you describe the term bot to your grandmother?
My grandma is dead.
All right, thanks for the feedback. You know, and here's another example from Poncho, and I'm not going to read the whole
weather
thing.
in Brooklyn is 46 degrees. And then the user says, this weekend? And Poncho says, excusez-moi? It's absurd. So, and this was the best of the best at the time. So like I said before, we're handing off the baton too early. The human handoff bots, the template bots, the lead gen bots, they're great, but it's not chipping away at that $200 billion we're spending on live human support.
So what about voice? Like, is that going to help contribute to this problem? Like, we just launched a new voice feature with bot copy.
I sometimes say to Dustin, voice is overhyped, and he gets incensed because we love voice and we all think voice is the future. But sometimes we think that the new voice technology is distracting from the brain behind the voice. And the brain behind the voice matters too, of course. And this brings me to, maybe you don't know who this is. This is Mitsuku, the name of a bot that went 19 minutes and 40 seconds on a Turing test. You're all at an AI convention, so I assume you know what a Turing test is. It's, you know, if you can convince a tester that you're human, you've passed the Turing test. It's a big deal. This bot was built using rules-based, basic, simple AI, Dialogflow. It was actually Pandora bots, but it was AI, ML, nothing fancy, no neural nets, no Markov chains, no bidirectional learning. 20 minutes in a general context where you could ask Mitsuku anything and it had to convince you that it was human. So then why can't a Fortune 100 with endless resources build a narrow use case bot that can go 20 seconds? The builder of that bot...
So the dumb bots problem is they hand the batons off too early. You often get frustrated and then a human takes over, and that's really not chipping away. And smart bots are complicated. So what's kind of the problem here?
This is Ronnie Coleman. He's a great bodybuilder, won Mr. Olympia 10 times in a row. And he always said, everybody wants to be a bodybuilder, but nobody wants to lift the heavy-ass weights. Everyone here wants to be an innovator, but nobody wants to lift the heavy-ass weights. I'm not talking about you personally, but in general, corporate America, corporations all over the world talk about innovation. Roll up the sleeves, lift the heavy-ass weights, dig into the harder frameworks to personalize your bots. The problem is people think it's too hard.
So let's dive into that. Next slide. And jump into the fundamentals.
Sure.
So here's an example. First thing we usually talk about is what's the medium that you're going to be chatting with your customers? Is it voice? This is a website example of a company using bot copy, but is it Facebook Messenger? And why are you using it there? So usually that's the first thing. Is it your application? And then it's where you're going to build. There's a lot of NLP, NLU platforms. We know Dialogflow really well. That's why you keep seeing it. But there's Rasa, which is amazing. There's Microsoft Bot Framework. There's Amazon Lex. So pick yours. Dialogflow's omnichannel. It's great. Rasa is amazing too. Next. This is actually a picture when we would help clients and we would really break it down. Okay, we want your top 4 things that you're going to start with and really map it out. And then after you've really mapped it out, and great programs to map out are readily available. You've got Bot Society, Bot Mock. This is actually designed on a software that used to be called Real-Time Board. You can't upload anything to anything, but it was just kind of fun to design and play around with.
So far, just the first 2 steps. Have a place to put your bot. We think it should be on your website. If you want to know more about why we think that, talk to us afterwards. We have a lot of sound arguments to back that up. And then step 2 was map out what your users want to know. Start somewhere. Those were little seeds that are going to grow into huge trees over time.
And then map out the intents. Like, if you were to hire a person to do the same thing that your bot's going to do, what's their job? What's their role? What defines them doing their job bad? And then create intents around that. Go back. So, like, for instance, what is bot copy? That's the intent. They're trying to figure out what bot copy. There's a million things off of our response to that you need to be thinking about that they're going to ask too. Those are follow-up intents. And then the beautiful thing about these NLP and NLU engines that some people obviously know and others that are just getting started don't, is that people are going to ask all sorts of questions and bounce all over the place. And these frameworks really allow you to handle that.
So hold up, one thing. You see follow-up to the follow-up. We've seen follow-up to the follow-up to the follow-up to the follow-up. And this is fractal because it's not just one array. You're talking about arrays that split off in multiple directions. But then again, you're only talking about what is bot copy, how much does it cost, who are you guys, maybe 4 things. So that's a narrow use case. If you think of your customer support questions, that's a narrow use case. You might have to go narrow, but very deep if you want to get satisfaction. Maybe not, but you don't have to go wide. If you go wide, you go shallow. If you go narrow, you go deep. Follow-ups.
Next.
And in that way, again, keeping context. We were here to talk about copywriting, which is content, but we think that context is, trumps content. So that's why we spent most of the time talking about it.
And then really look at these analytic platforms that are available. This is an example of Dashbot. We integrate with Dashbot. All your conversations are going to be pipelined there. So for instance, in this example, this is again from the Oxygo that was on the previous screen, which is a healthcare application. Now they can't actually sell the product, so a lot of their problem was we're getting all these questions, but it's not really valuable for us to answer because we just have to dish them to the insurance provider that can sell the product. So we created a chat experience, and one thing was, is it covered by Medicare? Something that is obvious, but at the time we didn't have built into the agent. But we can then refer back to these analytics programs and say, okay, well, yeah, that's pretty obvious. Let's put that into the training phrase. So here we say, we just add it in and select enter. And then all of a sudden, the bot can recognize that.
We did something pretty tricky here and pretty elegant, is that we just put a little blurb about Medicare into our response about pricing in general. So that way anyone who asked about pricing also got the Medicare information, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. So when we build very deep arrays for narrow use cases, we don't just make them up willy-nilly. They're informed by the data.
And then all of it starts to come together. Like there's a lot of resources out there, and really the biggest problem that we see at Bot Copy is the time that the account is created and the time that it gets to live on their website. And that's because everybody's training and building, and then when they deploy, it never ends. Like you've got to continue looking at it if you want this truly to become smarter. Every conversation has been mentioned before, you can learn from, and not just by training the bot. There's so much information from these conversations that you can pull and add to your product. Feedback that is the most direct feedback you're ever going to get. It's customers actually asking or even potentially complaining about the product, service, or technology that you're offering. So use everything wisely.
You can close that gap to where there's no more holes, and you don't have to hand the baton off in many cases.
And really think about how you're attacking this problem. Like the reason you're building these bots is to save money on repetitive tasks or questions. Maybe it's because you have lack of resources, or maybe it's because you're paying too much for the resources that are currently doing the same thing over and over. Whatever it may be, think about that and put a number behind it and keep training to attack that number.
Right, and we focus mostly on customer service. The $200 billion figure is about how much we're spending on human customer service doing repetitive tasks. Reason we focus on customer service is because we clearly need humans because we're spending $200 billion on it. We didn't focus on a different thing like sales or slot filling and that kind of thing because a lot of times you can get the same result through an app ordering a pizza, you know.
And RoboCopy brought up some good points, like with ways to attack the problem, like adding different buttons or thinking about ways to, like 3 yeses, and that's all great. And another thing is sometimes web views, like inside of our chat, you can click into a web view, and sometimes actually forums and getting 3 or 4 questions out of the way works a lot better than a conversation back and forth. So we don't need to get sucked into the idea that we just need to keep writing and answering questions and going back and forth. There's ways to display things better, and sometimes that is with a few graphics. And I think
that's it.
I think that's it.
Thank you guys for sticking around, and big hand for yourselves.
Woo! Let's give them a big round of applause.
If you do that, sky's the limit. You can scale infinitely.
That's right. And we're going to do some Q&A. So who's my first question going to be from? Vittorio. What's your question? You can ask him anything you want.
Sure. Hi.
What's up, man?
So which is one of the things when you started to do copywriting that you had to relearn for conversational copywriting? So something that was counterintuitive when you moved into the space.
This is a good question. It's a good question for you, Rob. So Rob started he's an award-winning ad writer. He's written for American Express, Wire, all sorts of things. So his transition into the conversational AI space actually is quite cool.
So can you repeat the question?
A couple of minutes, but not.
What do you got to think about as a conversational writer compared to other?
Compared to other writing? I was a copywriter at major agencies, and I did a lot of TV, radio, print for big companies, and so the quality had to be very high. And sometimes in radio, we do dialogue, so you'd have to have an ear for dialogue. So some of that kind of transferred over when we started writing for bots. But like I said, and I kind of stand behind it, is at the very beginning, in theory, we ran away with this idea of like brand DNA and all these like grand philosophies about the 4 basic temperaments of human moods. But then when we got to the practice part of it, a lot of that went out the window, and we just needed to keep it really clear, concise, and upbeat. And that's my take on it as somebody who has a background in the liberal arts and who's been a writer his whole life, his whole career. I love writing. I love creative stuff. But that's my take on it.
Yeah. What's going on?
So could you comment at all on any differences there might be for bots that are deployed to a website versus, say, Facebook or Slack or something like that? Do you write any differently or have any other experiences?
Facebook is a great medium if they're on Facebook. Now, 2 years ago when we were designing all sorts of things, we got a lot of kickback from our clients because the Facebook widget actually takes you to Facebook. And if you go through mobile experience, it takes you off the website to Facebook. There's no branding tweaks to it. You're stuck within that framework. And it was a huge problem for us. Now, it was great if they were already on Facebook and discovered you through the Discover section on Messenger, or you had an ad, and you clicked like, and then the bot chatted. And it's also really good for re-engagement. But when people come to your website, that's like your domain. They want very custom and simple widget solutions. So that's what we moved into. Now, follow-up engagement, and one of the reasons we like dialogue flow is because then you can connect it with Twilio, you can do SMS, you can pipeline it to email. But we just saw so much need and really want, especially with companies using Dialogflow, for a white-labeled widget, to take what they've built and put it on their website because they don't want to pass it to anybody else. And honestly, it starts with a lot of customer service things, but we've seen a tremendous grow in HR and things like that. So types of questions are a little bit different. Yeah, and I also kind of get annoyed with Facebook bots every once in a while when they're just kind of pinging me and it feels a little spammy, and what used to be such a personal space now is kind of invading, and bots are doing that. So I think there's an elegant way to do that, and I'd be happy to talk with people about that. But it is interesting. There was a lot of statistics in the beginning that email open rates, or bot open rates, were so much higher than email, which is true. But it's also, almost like fishing with dynamite, because no one's used to a bot prompting you in this place. We're all used to getting these spammy emails and just kind of ignore them, right, and don't open them. But when someone's either SMS or in Facebook Messenger, it's kind of a newer experience, so you're going to expect a lot of open rates. So it's slowly gone down. It's still higher, but yeah.
The path of least resistance to a bot is through a website, we think, right now. Anyone with a web connection, go right to your URL. You as the brand, you own that experience. Nobody's standing in between or making the user log in. It's confidential.
I don't know if anybody's familiar with Swelly, but we helped in the very beginning design Swelly's conversation, and I tweaked the whale into a really cute, fluffy whale. It was times 3 Austrian guys trying to figure out how to write copy for 20 to 25-year-old women. And I was like, English is your second language. Can I just try, add a little flavor in here? And it worked. Swelly quickly blew up to 10 million users in 2 months. It's one of the most exciting things I'd ever been a part of. I'm not sure if Facebook's landscape is the same anymore. There's been a lot of privacy. We got almost shut down as a company when Facebook put a pause on bot development during their litigation last year. So those are just all things to consider. Any other questions? Yeah. We got time, Steph?
Sorry, one question. So I think in the morning we discussed a lot about development, and I think in the afternoon we're talking a lot about design, which is really good. So yeah, I'm saying in the morning session we talk a lot about development, and in the afternoon section we are discussing a lot about design and writing. So what I want to talk about is a design handoff, which is a technical way of implementing the design. So what is your opinion about an ideal design handoff? What are the different artifacts which comes when you hand off the design to the development team?
Okay, great question. And it's something that we're trying to help out with every day. I mean, there's great design resources, as I mentioned. Bot Society is over here. I'm not sure if BotMock is still here, but those are great tools for your team to test. We also integrate with Janus AI. I don't know if anybody's familiar, but it's a live chat that actually takes how you've responded, and you can transition that to Dialogflow. So instead of actually building out an entire experience, your live chat team can take it and then upload that to Dialogflow based on their response. So
think about that. So as the live chat personnel is answering the question, they're simultaneously training the bot to do it next time. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, but the designing is an art. I mean, we're dealing with all these new jobs that are being created. Like conversational designer wasn't a thing 3 years ago. Neither was a conversational architect. So there's all these new things being created, and that's what's part of the big struggle. And we were talking with some banking companies I can't really name, but they had to introduce each line of copy to their legal department to make sure it was approved before they could deploy it live. So these are just new things that we're all dealing with, and there's no right or wrong. There is great software out there to help with it. But yeah, it's not going to be perfect the first time either. So just make sure that you're using these analytic tools to read and make it better. It's never finished.
Thank you. Can I get a round of applause for Dustin and Rob? Thank you.